National Apprenticeship Week. It's been really great to see kind of the excitement and interest in apprenticeship-related events and activities this week. So, and we're not even close to being done. It's only Thursday. So, host a conversation with some amazing apprenticeship champions and partners. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Joe Stark, Regional Apprenticeship Director for the San Diego and Imperial Counties Community Colleges Regional Consortium. It's always a mouthful. Next, we'll have a couple other members of the team introduce themselves. We'll start with Jenny Preciado.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jenny Preciado. I am the Apprenticeship Employer Relations Liaison, working with Joe at the Regional Consortium. And I'm excited to be here this morning and enjoy this discussion with all of you.
Awesome. We'll just have maybe Karen introduce herself as well.
Morning, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm Karen Overclift. I'm the Employer Relations Liaison for San Diego City College.
Absolutely. She's one of our awesome co-conspirators there at City College. Appreciate you, Karen. And very happy to have Charles Henkels, the Executive Director of Launch Apprenticeship Network. Charles, go ahead and introduce yourself. I guess I just did, so
yeah.
there you go. Well,
yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, no, you just what else do I say now? No. Yeah. It's good to be here, everyone. Yeah, Charles Henkels, as Joe said, Executive Director for the Launch Apprenticeship Network. Yeah.
And really happy to be working with Charles and his team. Talk about co-conspirators. They're really doing amazing work. You hear launch just about in every conversation these days when it comes to apprenticeship. And so very happy to be working with Charles and his team. I think we have Amelia joining us here in just a bit. I don't know if she's on yet, but we'll have Amelia introduce herself in just a bit. She's with GKN Aerospace. Another amazing partner that we're working with. All right, so let's get to our agenda here. So we always want to kind of acknowledge some of our funding partners, in particular, strong workforce funding that supports our employer engagement efforts and regional consortium work. We also want to give a shout out to the awesome James Irvine Foundation, which is also supporting a lot of the work Jenny and I are doing, and also some partnership with Launch as well. So just a little bit about the regional consortium. So Jenny and I and Karen, and there's probably a few others on here as well on the call. We support our 10 colleges in the San Diego and Imperial counties around really connecting our colleges and employer partners around, in particular, of course, apprenticeship. So really, actually, I just got to say, I love the new San Diego Community College District logos. Those are pretty snazzy. All right, so I wanted to just kind of start with kind of putting a little context in today's conversation. This is from a recent report from San Diego Regional EDC, and so first, as you probably know, manufacturing sector is a significant part of the economy here in San Diego County, and there are thousands of jobs in the category. And, often we think of manufacturing and kind of folks working in that sector as sort of like working in factories, sort of what comes to my mind. But the sector includes really a highly diverse set of occupations and a rapidly evolving skill set. The other point here is that these are really good paying jobs. And, we're all familiar with the increasing cost of living in California, especially San Diego. These are jobs that provide living wages as well as accessible and attainable pathways for individuals who may not necessarily have a university degree. So we'll touch on this a little more in a bit. Also noteworthy here is that most of the growth is driven by small businesses, right? And this creates, I think, both a challenge as well as an opportunity when it comes to recruiting and retaining workforce talent in the region. So we'll talk a little more about that. So this next part, may or may not come as a surprise, but there's an interesting trend here. Again, apologize for kind of the dense text. I'm not going to read it all, but just kind of touch on some of this from the report. But notably, how companies are sort of reimagining access and entry into these jobs. Traditionally, a lot of these jobs did require sort of that minimum threshold of a bachelor's degree. And as we see now, this is really no longer the case, right? Big takeaway here is that the report has really called out apprenticeship as a specialized training model, and one that represents a partnership in which employers are working closely with local education agencies to really co-create and co-develop the talent that's needed in the industry. And so, this is great. Again, I think the traditional model of sort of like industry saying, hey, colleges, universities, K-12, deliver us the candidates we need. I think the approach is really turning into how can we really work together to co-create that talent. So, now we really get to a few of the big points we want to make here, and really seeing, and we'll continue to see, kind of the growth of the earn and learn model, otherwise known as registered apprenticeship, particularly in this sector. Um, Registered apprenticeship programs are often called the gold standard of work-based learning because they combine the on-the-job training with the related instruction at, for example, a community college or K-12 district. So, and then we also believe there's a great opportunity here in the region to kind of work together on creating an apprenticeship development hub in partnership with industry and the community colleges. We'll hear a little bit from Launch's work and what they're doing in the Inland Empire around that. But this would really make sense for a lot of reasons in terms of when you look at the growth of the sector, and many of the employers are small businesses, which they may not be able to, it may not make sense for them to kind of each sponsor their own program, but really sort of joining as part of a regional effort to sign on, right, to say a regional sponsor. So as you can see here, there's a lot of reasons why apprenticeships are attractive to both apprentices and employers, especially in comparison with, say, an internship. As we can see, on the one hand, there's much more investment in apprentices versus interns, but we would argue much more value and return on the investment across the board with apprenticeships. Namely, you have that clear path for talent development, as well as the certifications and degrees that come along with it. Finally, I wanted to share a sort of a visual of and this kind of interesting how this kind of has changed a little bit, and my thinking even has changed on sort of what this ecosystem looks like. But kind of wanted to share that you have several key players here that make apprenticeships successful. It's not an easy endeavor. There's a lot of moving pieces here, but we're fortunate today to have a global aerospace manufacturing employer represented, and what we would consider a real sort of powerhouse apprenticeship intermediary, who will discuss some of the work and benefits that go into this work. So with that, we'll just kind of pause here, and we'll kind of transition into our panel questions. This is really what folks came to see. I don't know if Amelia is here yet. I hope she's on.
I don't see her.
Okay. You may want to, Jenny, you may want to ping her
Okay.
and see what's going on. But maybe what we'll do is, in the meantime, since Charles is here, we'll kind of open up with a couple questions for Charles. We'll go fairly easy on him today, but I know he's used to being grilled up at CAC and so forth. But so Charles, talking about community colleges and the role that they play in apprenticeship, it seems to me, and of course, a lot of your work is around really community colleges being well positioned to be, an essential educational partner when it comes to delivering that related instructional component of apprenticeships, right? Makes sense for a lot of reasons, but as we know, what are some of the kind of key systemic challenges that you've encountered in your work with community colleges in terms of that registered apprenticeship development? And what are maybe a few things that Launch is doing to kind of help regions like San Diego and others kind of address some of these systemic challenges?
Yeah, sure. And I just saw Amelia's name pop up too, so I feel a little rescued here.
All right, Amelia, welcome.
So
We're
Yes,
getting right
sorry,
into it.
that
Great to
was
have you.
sorry.
Awesome. No problem. No problem.
Um, I'll go ahead and start answering. That'll give yeah, that'll give a little warm up time for Amelia here. Yeah, you know, one of the things that I sort of wanted to do to start out was actually just kind of introduce Launch, give people an idea of okay, what's our perspective, where are we coming from. So you had that slide a moment ago that had the different partners, and there was a yellow square that said sponsor or intermediary. And when I saw that, oh, thanks. Yeah, if you go back, I think it was the slide just before this. Um, it's an accurate portrayal of the different groups that get involved in building programs out in both designing but then also implementing new programs and expanding them. But it doesn't necessarily give you like a great picture of okay, who's the most active, or who's doing what day to day, or is everyone doing something every day. So when I had first heard this term intermediary, I kind of balked at it. I didn't really like it very much because it felt like, okay, this is someone or it's an entity that's kind of a pass through, or is sort of just trying to, kind of grab stuff or like, aggregate things. But what I saw over time was it gets to your question of, okay, what is the systemic barrier for apprenticeship growth? So the apprenticeship initiative in California, largely kicked off in like 2015, 2016. And it was sort of with this mindset that, hey, we could fund new programs. So things like the California Apprenticeship Initiative were started. Millions of dollars started going out in grants to create new apprenticeship programs. And it was sort of with this idea that there was seed funding, and these programs just needed a little bit of seed funding for a couple years, and then bang, they'd be off and running. And what a lot of program implementers like at the colleges were finding, fairly quickly was, oh, this doesn't work that way. This isn't just like put money out into the ecosystem, and programs will rise, kind of rise up themselves. What they were really finding was, no, this is challenging. There's a long-term approach to apprenticeship. It only works if you approach it that way long term, and it only works if you're talking about developing programs that are both sustainable and scalable. And this is where intermediaries really came into play, because you kind of highlighted it a little bit ago. When new programs are being created, if we're only taking it like at one of those entities at a time, what ends up happening is we don't build a program that is either A, sustainable, or B, scalable. So for example, mid-size or a small employer could very easily register a new apprenticeship program. They could work with Division of Apprenticeship Standards or Department of Labor. They could register a program, but they'd be building it sort of with the mindset that, okay, it's going to serve a handful of apprentices at their firm. But the administrative lift to do that is still pretty extensive. And so employers began finding, hey, this is a lot of work. We're being asked to do something that is really challenging from an administrative standpoint, but we're also not reaping the benefits of a large scaled system. So it's kind of like we're putting in all the effort it takes to run a pretty large initiative without getting the benefits of a larger initiative being run around them. Similarly, colleges kind of ran into the same thing. So interestingly enough, colleges also kind of took a crack at, okay, let's create program standards. Let's introduce this program and begin, implementing it. And they also found it challenging because they were thinking about this in the context of classes they could deliver that apprentices from, kind of the region would enroll into. And then what they were finding was, hey, not every company is able to join this so easy. It doesn't fit the different entities that we work with. Um, Similarly, we saw CBOs, take a crack at it as well. Hey, let's register an apprenticeship program that serves our community that we're trying to, really serve and really support. And in those cases, what was beautiful about it was the programs that were registered were really apprentice centered. They were really built around individuals that would be going through a program, but oftentimes it lacks some of those sustainability components, right? That you get when you're attached to something like a public agency, like a college district, or like a workforce development board or something like that. So essentially, what we were finding was, hey, a lot of these programs that are being funded and started are struggling, and data wise, this is exactly what we saw. So between 2018, for example, between 2018 2021, we saw something like 400 programs registered in the state. 2/3 of them were discontinued by 2022. And so we saw this big, drive to register new programs, but we didn't see foundation being set. We didn't see, this kind of these systemic barriers being addressed. So where Launch came at this was we had community colleges in Riverside and San Bernardino County that were recognizing this issue. And so what they did was they kind of pulled together some regional funding. And they just said, okay, there are some things that every single program as it begins needs. They all need technical assistance. They all need things like database systems for tracking work-based learning. They all need templates for industry partner agreements and for local education agency agreements. They also need a way to kind of systemically grow capacity as these programs start to grow. And so that's where Launch came from. It was a funded project by the community colleges in Riverside and San Bernardino County. It's changed a little bit over the years. So now we actually, as Joe had mentioned, we work with other regions to set up sort of the similar infrastructure, similar kinds of hubs, if you will, to help support the launch of new programs. And from like a success standpoint, it's been a very, very successful model. So we've during that time, like I mentioned, that kind of the failure rate of a lot of new programs, we haven't actually discontinued a single program. So as programs have gotten started, they've continued. We've built them in a way where new programs can get involved. We've served about 1,600 apprentices in a variety of industry sectors. We've partnered with about a dozen different community colleges to launch these programs, and about 160 industry partners that participated in these different program areas. The big issue, like I said, I think that systemically colleges are getting used to is that unlike in our traditional apprenticeship system where we have really established program sponsors that are oftentimes running training centers, even independent of the colleges themselves, and the colleges are kind of used to being like an RSI funding mechanism as opposed to necessarily like an education partner. In these new program areas, the systemic need that we're really looking from the college system is both related instruction, but it's also program coordination, program engagement, right? It's working directly with employers to figure out effective scheduling or to figure out effective recruitment pipelines. So I think the big systemic lift right now that's happening or that colleges are running into is, simply put, they're just being asked to do more for these new apprenticeship programs. And so meeting that need is really, I think, something that, one, it just takes them seeing it, accepting it, and then two, being good at it, building their own internal capacity. So I'll leave it there. I know we're going to dive a little bit more into detail on some of the specifics, but I guess I just want to give a big picture, 30,000-foot view of what we're about, and then also what I think is really the big thing, that the stage that we're at in development and discovery.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And that's it. Those are all our questions. I think you covered everything. No, I'm kidding. No, it was great explanation, overview. We want to get to Amelia, who's joining us from GKN Aerospace, and just so great to have Amelia here. And she's been such an incredible, patient, visionary partner through this whole process, and we're getting close. It's been a lift for sure, but as I said, she's been just a tremendous champion throughout this whole effort. And so, Emilio, we wanted to hear a little bit from your perspective in your industry. When we look at the talent development pipeline and kind of, meeting the workforce needs of your industry, what are maybe some of the, just give us a few of the challenges that you're seeing kind of as you're looking to kind of grow and develop that workforce pipeline.
Yeah, of course. So thank you, Joe, for the great introduction also. But yes, we do have quite a few challenges here at GKN Aerospace here in El Cajon when it comes to recruiting for our very highly specialized positions. So there's a lot of programs, right, that have apprenticeship programs around welding, machining, etc. But we have such a very specific skill set here when it comes to welding and machining. For example, if anyone's familiar with electron beam welding, that is one of our bread and butter processes here at GKN Aerospace. And it's a very highly specialized skill set that is very difficult to recruit for. We call them unicorns here, the electron beam welders, because it's almost like they don't exist when it comes to building pipelines and trying to recruit for them. So that's why something like making an electron beam welding apprenticeship program for us down the line, that would be something that would be incredibly helpful and incredibly useful for us. Something that we really want to take a look at. It also, another big challenge for us here is just being able to make the right relationships in the right areas to find those skill sets in the school. So we're doing a really great job finding the kind of the coursework and the areas of expertise with the schools now that we haven't been able to do in the past. So I see that becoming less and less of an issue just as we have more conversations and build stronger relationships in the local area. So yeah, that is our really biggest challenge. It's just that we have this very highly specialized skill sets that we're looking for, and finding the resources at the schools and how we can utilize those to help us build a pipeline. And we're getting there.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you. Sort of as a follow-up to that, so talk a little bit about some of the benefits you see in partnering with community colleges. For example, you mentioned a little bit around strengthening workforce apprenticeship development, but especially when we look at supporting, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts in your organization. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So luckily, El Cajon, the area that we're located in, is just very diverse population, and the schools here are just fantastic. We've built a lot of great relationships with Cuyamaca, Grossmont, Miracosta College, City College, and the talent that these schools provide is just it's fantastic. There's incredible programs. There's machine shops at these schools, and they offer just such a diverse set of skills and people. And building these relationships, we've just been able to kind of call upon a lot of different people and skill sets and see what's possible for diversifying our own workforce. This area is just really rich in talent and different types of people. So I think that has been key for us, and working with the schools here more in the East County area, but all in San Diego County area has been very rewarding. And we see how continuing these relationships and building these programs is just going to help our workforce become more diversified, more skilled, and hopefully stay with us even longer.
Outstanding. Thank you. So back to Charles, we talked about registered apprenticeships being often referred to as the gold standard of work-based learning. And from your perspective, kind of talk about how this is true in terms of, particularly around alignment with industry standards and workforce certifications.
Yeah. So, the reason that they use it like the gold standard terminology is basically the components that go into registering apprenticeship are comprehensive enough that that, okay, if someone goes through an apprenticeship program, they come out qualified. And that's kind of the simplest way to put it. But basically, so in an apprenticeship program, the components that you're pulling together is one is you're pulling together employment, right? Your employee, so Amelia is representing an employer. Employers employ apprentices as they go through a program, which is I would put like kind of the core thing that makes an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship is that person is on the job, they're contributing to a team, they're seeing, really in real time the importance of the skills that they're working on and developing, right? So they're essentially they're working alongside those unicorns that Amelia talked about before, and they're seeing this day to day. And I remember I was talking to a operations manager who when we were talking about the kinds of technicians that they needed. He said, there's just no substitute for time. You need enough exposure, enough practice at these different skills that that's what qualifies someone. It's just simply getting that exposure. So that's that first component. And what happens is I like to think of it as, hey, the apprentices and the employers are coming to an agreement. So the apprentices are saying, hey, I'm committed to learning these skills. I'm committed to showing up every day and giving you what I'm capable of today, in return for you sort of making this investment, right, in me as an individual. So the employers recognize that apprentices are growing and they're learning, and they need that kind of environment. So they're not being punished when they don't know something. They're being guided to understanding it. The second component that's the big part of what we talk about in registered apprenticeship is that related instruction component. And this is oftentimes where that industry credentialing, training and certificate comes into place. So if you looked at a job description, for example, like a job ad, oftentimes you'll see two things when it comes to like the qualifications. You'll see the experience piece, which I just talked about, and then you'll see some kind of technical credential or academic credential that comes alongside that, right? So industry partners are also using certification as a way of really recognizing, okay, where is someone in their technical understanding of this occupation or of this field. So what happens in apprenticeship that's really neat is in the state of California, there's ways to fund the related training that apprentices need as they're going through a program. And this includes incorporating both academic training. So like community colleges can receive apportionment funding for providing instruction to apprentices. But there's also ways of integrating things like third-party industry credential into that. That's one of the unique benefits of apprenticeship, and a part of why our state invests in it, both from like I said, kind of from an education, but also from a workforce standpoint. So pulling those two major components together, right, is really what makes this thing the gold standard. Because as apprentices are going through that related instruction and through that credentialing, they're applying exactly what they've learned, exactly what they've learned that day. One of my favorite stories, and this is kind of more from the building trades, but I think it applies in any industrial capacity. I remember I talked to an apprentice that had shared he was taking a safety training, and part of that safety training was the design and build of a job site ladder. And so basically it was learning the technical components of, okay, if you needed to get up to a high place and you didn't have a ladder, what could you design on the job that would meet safety specs, so you could still get the job done. And so he had shared this story where basically it was him, $1 million job site, right? So big job was happening, and they had this issue where they couldn't get up to a point in the job where they needed to. And so he immediately, turned that thing on and went, hey, this is something I just learned about. I can build it. And sure enough, the superintendent, safety inspector said, okay, you go ahead and build it, but it better be right. It better meet the specs. He did it, got the job done. That same apprentice owns his own business today. He, effectively kind of, just began applying more and more of those skills. But yeah, it's one of my favorite stories of just an immediate application of what he was learning there in the classroom applied on the job.
Love that. Yeah, thank you. All right, so getting back to the unicorn issue that we've brought up, right? So it's that issue of like, gosh, how do we create those highly specialized skill sets and those folks that can do that work that, just seems to be hard to be able to find folks that can do. So wanted to kind of hear your perspective, Amelia, in terms of, one of the key components back to the gold standard of why apprenticeship is such a great training model is the issue of mentorship, right? That idea of the new apprentice, right, coming together with the seasoned unicorn individual, right, to learn all of those specialized skills that honestly, for the most part, kind of have to be learned on the job, right? So talk about kind of that mentorship piece at GKN, Amelia.
Of course. So at GKN, we've really come a long way in terms of training and development for our employees in general. And how we see kind of an apprenticeship model working for us is that these students would be essentially partnered, right, with a subject matter expert or a high level, high skilled individual in that position who has many years of experience working in that area for us here at GKN. And why we think that's so important and so valuable is that, these students they're coming in basically as clean slates, right? No experience or very little experience. And we're able to then partner them with an expert who's going to really mold them and show them exactly, as we like to say at GKN, what good looks like when it comes to those specific areas that they would be working in. These employees obviously give the invaluable experience of just how to do the job. So the technical piece of it, how to perform at your best when it comes to the actual art of machining, welding, or maintenance, being a technician in that way. But there's also the mentorship piece when it comes to, how to get promoted, how to be a great employee and come to work doing your best every day. Those soft skills too, that we also feel like that's a really big part of mentorship. And that's something that will propel our apprentices, not just from, coming in and having a good program while they're in school, but, hopefully setting them up for a career that they want to stay with GKN for a very long time. So the mentorship piece is huge when it comes to just the longevity of these apprentices, turning them into full-time employees and having them stay with us hopefully for their whole careers, we hope. So we know that mentorship piece is so big when it comes to engagement, making sure that the apprentices have the tools and equipment that they need to do their job right. And then further than that, having what they need to grow and develop and be able to seek opportunities still with GKN, but bigger than when they started. So mentorship is just huge for us, and we totally see how that engagement piece is what really makes employees be successful and put out really great work, and then also feel very fulfilled in their work and want to stay with us and perform at their best for a very long time. So it's critically important, that mentorship.
Awesome. I want to work at GKN, by the way. Okay, that's another topic. Okay, so Charles, back to you in terms of, your organization's role as an intermediary, but particularly around, again, where you have a sort of a cluster of employers around maybe, some particular unicorn issues around training and really trying to kind of get that talent development pipeline. Talk a little bit about your work in, not only in your region, but also, something we're hopefully going to be building capacity around is creating that community of practice around, getting those employers together to really kind of dig into some of these issues. Talk a little bit about sort of your work in that area.
Sure. Amelia, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I was hoping, so kind of up at the front of this, you had listed off the different education institutions and organizations that you're working with currently. Is there any way you could do that again real quick? And like I said, I apologize for putting you on the spot. I didn't warn you I was going to do that.
No.
But
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess organizations we work with currently, in the past,
Yeah,
Hope to
all
in
of
the
them.
future.
Yeah.
All of them, yeah. So Cuyamaca, of course, Miracosta, City College, Grossmont, Miramar.
It's great. Any high schools?
So we did have not too long ago, we had the Anza Borrego students,
Mhm.
welding students, come here and take a tour. They're quite a whiles away, so that was a journey for them, but that was awesome. And recently we were part of, I saw our friends at the East County Economic Development Council are on the call. And we recently worked with one of the local high schools as part of the manufacturing expo, having them interview our subject matter experts here. So yes, slightly with the high schools, but a lot with the local kind of higher level education, but we have done some high school work as well.
Super cool. Thanks. So part of why I did that is I want to help put educators and workforce development people in your perspective for a second. So I think you just listed off approximately 10, maybe a dozen different education organizations that you've interacted with, that you've had meaningful relationships with, right? And I'm sure if we kind of even just like asked other people at your company, we might get another, 6 or 7 more. So educators, imagine if every single one of those partnerships required a whole different kind of agreement, a whole different program registered with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, a whole different program registered and funded by the Department of Labor, right? Just imagine the layers of complexity that would be put in place for an industry partner just to participate in registered apprenticeship if we did it one institution at a time, if we did it one company at a time. It would take, and I kid you not, it would take like 100 years before we had really effective programming happening. So really, what we focus on as an intermediary is this idea that, hey, that we want our employers to say exactly what Amelia just said. Hey, look at all these great educational resources we have to pull from. Look at the infrastructure of our workforce and education system in our region. Look at the assets that we have, right? So the whole trick really is about setting up a smart, dynamic administrative structure where it's easy and streamlined for an employer to be able to just tap into that, right? Without dealing with a lot of complexity, without dealing with, like I said, different, managing 12 different contracts with 13 different descriptions of apprenticeship that are, different based on who you're talking to or what's happening. So what we do, what we really focus on at launch is a pretty simple idea. But basically what we do is we say, okay, our industry partners need to be at the lead of our programs, right? They need to have a real say, a real vote, a real impact on, okay, what apprenticeship programs look like within the region. And so what we focus on at launch is clustering industry partners that have agreed to the basics. They've agreed that yes, we can employ apprentices that are learning. Yes, we can support them through that process. We'll understand that they're going to be going to school. They're going to be learning things as they develop. Amelia described it as like blank slate, individuals that are developing into unicorns. So we get those industry partners and we say, okay, let's get you together. Let's create a regional cluster of like-minded companies that are looking for those like-minded or those similar unicorns, or looking to develop those similar unicorns. We do the same thing on the education side, as we say, okay, hey, colleges, high schools, the same ones that Amelia just listed off, you're actually all servicing the region in a really similar way. You may be doing it in different locations and different jurisdictions, or you might be focused on different residents, right? So obviously it's easy to kind of differentiate. High schools are focused on high school students. Community colleges might be focused on community college students, but you're both still participating really in the same talent development cluster as far as our region goes. So you should be clustered together too. You should be working at this, seeing this as kind of a joint effort. So what we do is we call those the communities of practice that you described. We refer to them as regional apprenticeship committees, right? And it's basically it's that partnership. And we focus on getting that together and then creating essentially, like I said, an administrative structure where the schools can provide programming. They can provide, right, instruction to apprentices that are registered under that regional committee. They can provide recruitment resources to the employers that are participating in that committee. CBOs can provide supportive services and sometimes even supplemental training beyond what the colleges provide, right? But all in the context of, hey, this is a regional economic system that we're putting in place, as opposed to like kind of pockets of programs. And what it does, that kind of basic design, it's not dissimilar to what we have in our traditional apprenticeship system. So what's interesting is as complicated as all that might sound, what you find as you do this is it actually simplifies things later on down the road. I oftentimes we've run into situations where, like, I remember we had one company that registered an apprenticeship program. They started it. It was a strong program, but it was so specific and so narrowly defined that later on, when they were trying to make small adaptations or they were trying to work with different education partners, they found it very, very difficult to do so. So like I said, setting up with this kind of regional structure in mind from the beginning, while it sounds like it's a bigger undertaking, it's really not. But it sounds like it's a bigger undertaking at first. It will set you up for streamlining things later on. It'll be easier to bring new industry partners in, right? It'll be easier to bring in CBO partners. It'll be easier to create those needed bridges between high schools and community colleges, and even in some cases, community colleges to universities. So yeah, so that's the basic why. It's hard not to go too technical into detail. I don't think that's what we're here for today. So I'll pause there. But you can do follow-up questions, Joe, if there's something
Yeah.
I'm missing that you needed described. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And what we really want, the big takeaway hopefully today is that this is sort of the beginning of a much longer conversation that we want to have here in the region, where we're, eventually starting to really bring together those key partners that Amelia mentioned, that Charles mentioned, but really here in the region. We have several of them. I just kind of doing a quick scan of the audience. I mean, shout out to Angela Nagel, East County EDC. They're doing great work with employers, and how can we partner with them around this work? Debbie and Barry there with Workforce Connect, doing great work in that area, particularly with high schools. So there's a lot of folks in the region doing really great work around that, and employer engagement and apprenticeship work and work-based learning. But it is kind of happening to some degree in silos, right? So what we're trying to do here in the region with Launch's help and support is really, again, create that space for some of those that regional hub work that we're talking about. And there's a lot of components to it, and people like me and Charles and Amelia and others, like, we want to geek out, and we also want to sort of be mindful of the time and also open it up to questions a little bit later. So we did see Robert's question there that we're going to get to in just a bit, around some of the partnerships with high schools. That I think that's a great question. But just to maybe kind of wrap up with Amelia and Charles, and then we'll open it up to questions. So Amelia, as you're looking 3-5 years ahead, what do registered apprenticeships look like here in San Diego County, possibly Imperial as well, and kind of in that related industry sector, and maybe what should our region be doing a better job of, right, to prepare for that vision?
So I definitely see apprenticeships being much more widespread and much more utilized, not just by GKN, but hopefully by all the aerospace industry in the area. I'm really hoping that we can have even more programs so we can extend into a lot more of our areas of expertise, make programs for all of our unicorns, if you will, that we have here in our company. And same with the greater area in San Diego. I also hope that I see in the future that we have even stronger partnerships than we already do. Kind of like what Charles was saying, building a network or having maybe a system, something that kind of makes it easier for the businesses to plug and play into these apprenticeship programs, right? I'm hoping that there's going to be more access, more accessibility for businesses to get these apprenticeship programs going, hire apprentices, and hopefully 5 years from now, we see that those apprentices are now holding managerial roles or more senior level positions at the companies that they started these programs at 5 years ago. So I guess that kind of ties into what I think maybe the region could be doing better is finding ways to connect schools, businesses, and launch and our intermediaries better together, so that I know working with Joe and Charles has been fantastic building a program, but it's been there's challenges and it's been a bit of a grind for us at times, and I think that the more that we build those networks, build that network together, the easier it will be over time. And I think that's going to be really great. Speaking from our own industry here at GKN Aerospace, I know that that's something we want to really build to is more interest in the aerospace field at schools, and really help build that more into the curriculum. So that is something I also seeing improving in 5 years is really kind of having more of a presence, and just making it easier, more accessible for us to have these programs. So I'm really excited. I know we're going to be able to do that, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julia, and I appreciate your honesty and there around doing some of the systems work is not easy, and I just think ultimately I think what it boils down to is you got to have those individuals that are willing to just kind of roll up their sleeves and sometimes just kind of plow through it initially. But with the longer term vision, of course, is what can we do to really strengthen and build those systems to make it a lot easier. And I love your plug and play phrase because that's ultimately what we're trying to create here in the region is just making it easier for folks to plug into existing programs and get them up and running sooner rather than later. So it doesn't take 2 years to get something going. So kind of a similar question, Charles, kind of looking ahead, 3 to 5 years, and I know you do a lot of work at the state level as well around apprenticeship. What are some of the things you see in terms of, where might we be or should we be 3 to 5 years from now to really create those systems to make it easier for employers, local education agencies to partner around this thing we call registered apprenticeship?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think the first thing I would say, well, I'll be cynical and then I'll be optimistic. My the cynical thing I would joke about a little bit is, apprenticeship is literally the oldest model of learning that we have in our like literally in our species, right? So so it's funny that we've managed to complicate it, I guess, is my cynical statement. My optimistic statement is that I think that one of the things that we're in a phase of is more and more educators, more and more workforce development folks, CBOs are in a stage of being equipped. So there's so much learning that's happening. So in that, in this period where, GKN has journeyed through setting up an apprenticeship program, the truth is that the folks working on it have also journeyed through that, right? And they've learned, they've made mistakes, they've made errors, they've also had successes, but they've learned as they're doing this how to set up good programming. And what I have the kind of the cool vantage point of these days is seeing that happen at a statewide level. So we're seeing groups like you're an example of that, Joe and Jenny, in that your regional consortia recognized this need and said, okay, we need to begin building not just programmatic capacity in isolation, but we need to be building capacity really as a regional consortium. And this is happening in many regions. So it's no longer isolated where it's just happening one place or being tried. It's really being rolled out now as, hey, an effective, proven practice that just needs to be implemented in different areas. So I think those are the things that give me encouragement. If we look at this, 5 years from now, I think there's going to be a couple of things that look really different. So one is going to be the normalcy that Amelia kind of hinted at earlier, as to it has to become. What's interesting is these things are happening concurrently. It's becoming more normal with industry. It's also becoming more normal with workforce and education systems. There's a lot of bureaucratic red tape that just simply needs to be slashed. To be honest with you, that's something that I think policymakers are taking pretty seriously at this point. Like some really serious legislation has occurred during this initiative that sometimes I don't even think we're aware of how big a deal it is. But up until 2018, 2019, community colleges, for example, couldn't claim regular FTES apportionment for providing related instruction to apprentices, which if you're not in the community college world, I just said phrases that meant nothing to you. But if you're in the community college world, you're like, yeah, that's a huge deal. If we can't claim our regular apportionment funding, how are we going to build programmatic capacity around these things? So policymakers are also serious about this. They're really working to make it happen. But I think the two things are going to be different. So like I said, there's going to be a normalcy. That's number one, is there's going to be a normalcy with our industry partners being comfortable with the idea that they employ apprentices and they train apprentices. I think for the educators, one of the things that's going to switch a little bit is the way that we think about apprenticeship programs. So right now, we think about it purely in that context, apprenticeship programs, and they're kind of happening or they're not happening. One of the switches that we need to make in the education world is we need to think of them as students first. We build so much programming, we build so much capacity at our colleges with the idea that we are serving students. We cannot get away from that just because we're thinking about apprentices. And a good analogy I would use is concurrent enrollment and dual enrollment, right? We don't think of concurrent enrollment as happening only in one place at our college. We really think of it more broadly as, okay, this is a kind of student that's using our institution to advance academically. So we need to set up systemic support for them to do that. And dual enrollment is a good example of where we put up programmatic support, right? But we're essentially accomplishing the same thing. We're helping someone advance within their academic career. Apprentices are a kind of student, right? So before we necessarily think of it as a kind of program, we have to think of it as a kind of student. It's someone that's working on the job. They're learning, right? They're learning skills that they develop. Their education is going to be shaped by that experience. And if we can kind of wrap our brains around that, what's going to happen is we're not just going to think of, oh, one apprenticeship program in manufacturing. We're going to think of our whole institute has changed. Now we support people that are on this kind of journey in all of our departments: automotive, manufacturing, healthcare, right? Like business, all of these different areas. The infrastructure is there. It's just not activated for these kinds of students in mind. And the programming, like I said, the programming is almost, in a way, it's almost incidental to that. If we can do those two things, like I said, if industry can get used to the idea that it employs apprentices and deal with all the stuff that we put in the way of and complicated that process with. But if they can just hold to that, and like I said, schools can get used to the idea that this is really about serving a kind of learner, and not get too stuck on the idea that it's about a kind of program, but really a kind of learner. We're gonna hit that 500,000 goal that the state set. We're gonna blow past that. It won't even, we're gonna laugh that was ever needed to be a goal, or that it was ever difficult to achieve.
Yeah, it's going to be 500,000 just in San Diego and Imperial counties alone, right? So excellent. Appreciate that. All right, we'll turn it over to Jenny.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Charles. That was, and Amelia, that was very insightful. And it's always good to hear from you too. So I'm going to pick up on the Q&A. So please go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. I'm going to start with there's a couple questions around high school students. So this one says, I would be most interested in learning about how high schools can be involved in this work. What can we do right now in high schools to best situate ourselves in supporting our students to enter the world of apprenticeships?
Yeah, so I think as far as the, the high school participation, some really cool stuff that we're seeing. So one is a broad approach, a broad strategic approach to pre-apprenticeship, where you are intentionally not just introducing, right? Not just saying, hey, apprenticeship exists to students, but intentionally partnering with apprenticeship programs in your region to set up a meaningful pathway for your students to get into those programs. And depending on the nature of the program, you may have a situation where pre-apprenticeship is just, it's going to be the solution for creating access for your students to enter those programs. You might even start to find that there's the possibilities of things like youth apprenticeship. Some other things that we're seeing high schools do is they actually look at, hey, if we can set up the proper, the right partnerships with industry, there's no reason we can't get high schoolers employed, right? And starting their apprenticeship with regional businesses that are participating in registered apprenticeships. My big encouragement on that would be don't go it alone. Partner, like if you're a high school, connect with the community colleges, connect with CBOs, connect with groups that are working in apprenticeship, and look for ways to do it together. The most effective youth apprenticeship initiatives that we've looked at across the country all use this kind of broader systemic approach. Very few initiatives are held and carried just at single districts or single high schools alone. It really takes kind of like a broader approach. But those would be two best practices I would dive into for sure.
Okay, great. And we'll be talking more about youth apprenticeships tomorrow with the Koya webinar. So before this is over, we'll get that information into the chat for you guys. And then the other question that sort of piggybacks off this, very similar. She says, I'm an internship coordinator and teacher from a high school. I'm curious to hear more about how we can incorporate pre-apprenticeship opportunities for students at the high school level. And I think this part's already been addressed, but the second part is, would you mind addressing how we can build access for high school students on a more regular basis than attending a career fair? So I think that's actually, Amelia mentioned that they had done a tour with the students from Anza-Borrego. I know that's one thing that the EC/EDC does with Manufacturing Day and some other opportunities to get high school students some visibility. We've also got some representatives from Workforce Connect on the line, and they do a fair amount of that sort of experiential learning for students at the high school level. So I think that there are pockets of that, and maybe that's something that we could work on together and try to figure out how to make more of that happen. So I don't know if anybody, Joe or anyone else, has something to add on that. No? All right. So let's see. Next would be there is a question here. So okay. So that one was answered in the chat. Karen's question was answered in the chat. That's all we have for questions at the moment. Does anybody want to take their phone off mute or take themselves off mute and ask a question?
I would. I think so. I have a unique perspective on this because of the fact that I was married to someone who started out as an apprentice right out of the Marines when he was very young and was in his trade for 32 years before retiring with like a pension and wonderful health benefits and all of the, good things, the retiree breakfasts and all of the support that someone has when they're in a whole community of friends that, everything that you would want from your people who stay in a career for one career for their lifetime, basically. And I don't know how to convey that sense of community that you get from being part of the program to this generation. Because they look at it from a short-term perspective and, like what is right in front of them. Boy, this is hard work. This is different than what my friends are doing when they're going to college. So I don't know, how does the younger generation learn about something that is different from what they're being pushed toward? And that's kind of a broad statement, but I can't even tell you how happy, I was with my, low prescription costs and, like I said, the pension, those things that you just don't get anymore. And so, and especially, organizations like GKN that have been around for a long time, that stability is really important. And I think, especially students from, community college students that are really local to the area around their college and sometimes don't get away from that area, just the sense of community that they get from that community college, can somehow be tied into apprenticeships. I know I'm sort of rambling here, but I just didn't know as a native San Diegan about apprenticeship until I married someone who had been an apprentice and was in a trade.
Yeah, does anybody, Charles or Amelia or Joe, do you guys have any comments on ways that you found are effective for promotions or things you've seen for promoting the apprenticeships, things you've seen in the past?
Well, oh, go, no, you go first, Mila. Yep.
I was gonna say, and I don't know if this is really an answer, but I totally agree with you, Karen. Like there is this kind of there's a lot of other rewards to the trade line of work and the apprenticeship kind of pipeline and that sense of community and the other benefits that aren't so maybe material all the time um, that are really fantastic about this line of work. And it is kind of difficult to communicate that to students, I think, or kind of paint them that picture all the time. But that's why I found like having students here on the site, having them kind of take a tour and see exactly what the environment looks like is extremely beneficial. And then when it comes to like that mentorship we talked about before, um, a lot of like I'll use for example our machinists, right? There really is kind of a sense of community between them and a bond that they share just because of the work that they do. The work that's it's very incredible and it's almost like an artwork. Um, and I think that, with these apprenticeship programs, that mentorship, they're kind of immediately put into that community. And in that way, they then get that sense and they can see that once they're already here, but kind of communicating that to them ahead of time is a challenge. And I'm not sure exactly how to articulate that yet myself. When it comes to, the benefits, the more material benefits, pensions, etc., that's another thing that I think maybe we can work more with the schools with to kind of help them understand the importance of that. They're young right now, so they don't really maybe see the significance of having a good pension plan or working at a company that's, going to take care of you the longer that you stay. So that's something I think just that we need to maybe think about more because it is important and it is, a really good selling point too for these programs. So I didn't really answer your question there, but kind of just emphasize that I agree that it's a challenge. But Charles, I don't know if you have a better idea how to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's something we have to do. Like we have to take it seriously. There was a study several years ago, and I'd have to find the reference, and if someone wants me to, they can email me later, and I'll track it down. So I'm not just making this up, but there was a study that was talking about the mental health of college students is declining. And I think a part of my own personal theory, and so this part's not part of the study, but it's my this part is me, is one of the things I think maybe we've leaned too much into is this idea of kind of isolating college students in in their own, their own little world, right? So it's kind of like, oh, you go to college and you study and you're amongst peers that are studying the same thing, and that's going to become your community. But I think for a lot of people, that's not that is proving not to be the effective way to build community. And I think something that is really different about apprenticeship is because you enter employment, you're entering your workplace, really is part of your community, and your workplace is probably very, very diverse. Probably you're working alongside people that are older than you, younger than you, different ethnicity, different ideas about how the government should work, or how, like, you're getting exposed to uh, a real kind of a reality, right? Of, hey, this is what it's like to live in San Diego. This is what it's like to, to be here and to be among people. And I think so. I think from my vantage point, it's something that I think if we don't do right, there's serious consequences, I think, to not listening to what Karen just talked about. And it's yeah, I'm 100% behind you, and I think apprenticeship is one of those things that really helps people become a part of a community in a way that, I just don't I can't think of any other learning model that does the same thing so effectively. Yeah.
Just a big shout out and show some love for Amelia. She's got to jump to another meeting, but thank you so much, Amelia. We look forward to you're stuck with us. So we'll talk soon.
Thank you all so much for having me. This is great. Thank you. See ya.
Okay, so let's see. We have a couple more questions that have come through. Let's see. Have you established any work with the state of California through CalHR? Has any work been done toward this effort across the state's departments in general?
I know CalHR has engaged us. They have worked on some programs. It's a big, I know, with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards chief has changed, and it's been a little while since they wrote this report. But one of the big strategies for expanding apprenticeship was really working with public sector employers, including CalHR, but also just public sector employment in general. The follow-up question right there was regarding how long does it take. The answer is, there's some parts that it depends. So I noticed the question includes asking specifically about trade apprenticeship programs, like plumbing and electrical. Realistically, so the state of California doesn't approve a lot of new programs within the trade. So I had mentioned earlier the hundreds of programs that were approved by the state of California after 2018. It was like 450, something like that. Of those 450, I think it was like 3 were in the trades. And that excludes manufacturing. So when I say the trades, I'm thinking of like traditional apprenticeship programs. So usually the fastest method for engaging apprenticeship in the trade areas is working with existing apprenticeship programs. That can be made more complicated or less complicated depending on some things like union or collective bargaining agreement, how you're set up in that way as an employer. But it's probably your quickest pathway to launching a new program or integrating an apprenticeship would be to work with existing trades, registered trades programs. Outside of those programs, the approval timeline for getting a new program registered, really these days it has extended to be quite some time. Like, it's taking programs anywhere from 6 to 18 months to register. This is again one of the reasons that we really push for this regional sort of systems approach, so that you're not tied up in these lengthy timelines to register new programs every time you have a new industry partner, or every time, or even every time you take on a new occupation. You almost kind of want to get yourself set up as a system to have a catalog of programs that are approved, that both organizations and individuals can enter into, is really the broad strategic approach that we'd really advocate for. What are some of the existing apprenticeship programs that you work with for these trades? And I wonder if some of these questions might be best to dive into on a call, which I'd be happy to take. So we work with all kinds of trades. So I always look at, like, there's kind of like a big 40 of occupations that are in these like kind of trades areas, and understand the network. Like, so understanding, okay, who do you talk to if you're interested in carpentry or electrical? That's where we can help. Like, so we can help you get, tied into different groups. But there's a large, so we have in our state, approximately about 95,000 apprentices, and probably about 2/3 of those are in those building trades programs, and in those like kind of trades-based programs. So that just gives you an idea. It's a large network of programs that you want to probably be diving into.
Yeah, Charles, we do have a call set up with Save, so.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
Joe and I are
Perfect.
going to
Yeah.
be meeting with him soon, so hopefully we
Terrific.
can answer some of his questions there. That's all that's in the chat. Anybody else have anything, last minute questions, something you'd like to take your call off mute and just share with us?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Hudson. I'm with Earn and Learn. Charles, nice to see you again. And
Yeah.
Miss Karen, nice to see you as well. So we are, we help facilitate work-based learning, but we're also obviously very much in the space of apprenticeship and trying to understand and work with our employers to better prepare for long-term engagement like this. Obviously one of the big concerns with apprenticeships is the continued end game. Where are they going to get placed? How are the employers specifically going to maintain that level of commitment? And one of the emerging industries that we're working with more and more is the battery manufacturing space. And it's very much a startup culture. It's very Silicon Valley circa, 1997. People are getting bought and sold and picked up and put down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of sustainability work, if you will, is going through, and I use that term very broadly, are you doing with your employers currently to help them maintain, if they get bought and sold, that program still maintains and exists?
Yeah. I point again to this where we're seeing this kind of this regional or collective sponsorship structure make a lot of sense. So what it allows for, so we use like our solution to those kinds of things is that, hey, the industry partner agreement to participate in apprenticeship needs to be 2 to 3 pages, like something small, something easy, where if you do have something like that happen, like change of ownership, the new owners can look at it, can assess, hey, if this thing's been working, let's not break it, let's just continue on. We're changing business, essentially you're changing, in a way you're kind of changing which business has signed the industry partner agreement and participates. To do that, like I said, it requires you to kind of approach this from this sort of regional, we would call it like intermediary program sponsorship model, where it's not tied exclusively to any one company or any one organization. It's owned, really by your regional cluster. And I hope that helps. And if I miss completely, Kim, let me know.
No, it's great. Thanks, Charles.
Yeah.
All right, so it looks like we're sort of coming up on time. So unless there's any sort of burning last question, going once, going twice, we're going to follow up with an email to everybody who attended, and make sure you have all of our contact information. Jenny, me, Charles, we all work together, and we love to talk for hours about apprenticeship. So we're happy to jump on anytime. and answer any other questions or just kind of talk through some ideas you
Hi.
have.
Joe, I
But
had
we
a,
go
I'm
ahead. Sorry.
sorry,
Yes, go ahead.
I had a quick question. It's Wanda Rogers. I have a pre-apprenticeship program that's registered with the state. And so, Charles, when you mentioned that, I was intrigued because I've really been trying to work with the different apprenticeship programs, letting them know we can be a feeder. However, they see us as competition. And I'm saying to myself, it doesn't make sense. You need to meet your goal that the governor set in place. And we have some MOUs, some agreements, but the DIR requires a linkage agreement, and it also requires for these apprenticeship programs to sponsor the pre-apprenticeship. So how do we get around that? How can we be more appealing to an apprenticeship program, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just at this point kind of ridiculous, but anyway.
Yeah. Probably a phone call as well would help. Yeah, to get a better context. I do know what you mean in terms of, well, one, I know exactly what you mean in the way the state works with registering programs using linkage agreements. So I know exactly what you mean there. The competition component, I might need to get some more details on to better address the question of solutions. But I think I have an idea of what you're talking about, and a lot of times there are some, I do notice there's some communication breakdowns in terms of someone trying to do a pre-apprenticeship program when they're communicating with apprenticeship partners. It can be there can be misunderstandings, there can be accidental miscommunications that end up sending it weird directions. There are also, though, I know in some apprenticeship programs they have proprietary curriculum that they want to see used. And so when it comes to
Right.
getting like an agreement with a particular apprenticeship program, they may say, okay, the agreement is contingent on you using this curriculum or this setup or this model. So you might also be running into some of those things. But like I said, I think it'd help if we spoke directly. No.
Okay. I can reach out to Jenny or Joseph and they can
Yeah.
put us in contact. That would be great. Thank you so much. I didn't mean to interrupt, Joseph.
No, thank you. Thank you, Wanda. Appreciate your question. And yeah, we'll definitely follow up. So with that, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up. And again, just much love to our friend and apprenticeship guru and partner and soul brother, I don't know, Charles Henkels. We just love working with Charles and his whole team. He's got such an incredible team that he's built, who are just all fabulous as well. So can't thank you enough